The long-awaited health market inquiry has uncovered uncompetitive behavior and low levels of transparency in the private healthcare sector. The provisional findings also show that consumers are also paying too much for care and services. The Competition Commission initiated this inquiry in 2014 after it observed that price increases had reached levels that only a few people can afford. The inquiry's provisional findings show that the private hospital market is highly concentrated, which limits competition. The three largest hospital groups, Netcare, Mediclinic and Life Healthcare, have a market share of 90% combined. This is based on hospital admissions and more than 83% based on registered beds. Chairperson of the inquiry, Justice Sandile Ngobo, says competition in the funders market is not as effective as it could be.
Competition in the funders market is neither as vigorous nor as effective as it could or should be. In both the administration and open scheme markets, one large player, for example, Discovery Health in administration and Discovery Health Medical Scheme in open schemes, leads the market, especially in terms of growth, innovation, profitability. Other players largely follow its lead.
Dr. Ntutugo Bhengu, panel member of the inquiry, says the issue of licensing was also raised. He says they discovered that the hospital licensing process is not well coordinated in its current form and could be the reason for some market failures. Dr. Bhengu says the inquiry sought to take the issue of licensing further within the regulator.
Most provinces work on the R158, which is a regulation 158, and the license according to that. The Western Cape, I think it's regulation 187. The Free State works on a provincial act. So just there, you've got at least three ways in which hospitals deal with, regulators deal with licensing. We've sought to take this further by basically looking at licensing within the regulator. One would be on practitioners. I think this is a main point to make here on the licensing as well. Remember that in terms of licensing and certification, there is the first step that will happen outside of the regulator. For practitioners, that will be your HPCSA, that will be your Nursing Council or Allied Health. But once they have confirmed that you certified, that's when then the regulator comes in. And this is one of the new recommendations we're making, that the practice code numbering system moves from the BHF to the regulator to facilitate that process. It is outsourced to BHF, but it's the authority, we understand, of CMS based of what we do. So we feel it will sit better with the authority that's responsible for suppliers as opposed to funders. It deals with suppliers. And but also the new issue here is licensing the practitioner separately from the premises from which they work. There is a whole detail that we go into, and it has to do with linking the renewal of practice licenses to clearing up the database as to where practices are located. This is essential to deal with ghost practices. It will enable the regulator to basically do random and scheduled visits to practitioners, and it will deal with medical claims fraud. So the section on licensing is quite detailed, and you will find there quite a few more things that I haven't referred to. But it certainly is an area for improvement, and a lot of the ideas actually did come from the Department of Health, both national and the provincial. And it starts with settling for a national plan from which everybody works. Then the provinces will be responsible to enforcing and actually monitoring and providing updates into the system on an annual basis.
Would it not be better for funders to say these are the conditions to be met by practitioners, and any practitioner that's prepared to meet those conditions is admitted into that network, rather than creating clubs? Because for me, that would then be an open network where everybody knows the rules, where the patients have their choice and the practitioners can compete among themselves. When people club according to historical lines, others that are minorities get excluded from these arrangements. So I just have a cautionary on those issues.
We believe that provider networks can actually deliver more. We're saying this because we have seen submissions, some on a confidential basis, where service providers, where hospital groups, a large hospital group says, we offered Scheme X a 25% discount on pricing and we still didn't make the DSP. There are many such examples. And if you look at it, there is no other tool that we've come across where just on proposals we're talking about 25% discount. It is true that we are aware that the whole issue of access might be impacted, but that's where the guidelines come in. You will see in the report we've proposed guidelines. Among some of them, obviously, the question is if the DSP is too far, you can't penalize. In an emergency, it can't work.
It's probably time to tell the truth that the pricing vacuum was created by the Competitions Commission. And they need to account for the pain and the mess they have caused to South Africans.
But this culminated into a recognition that perhaps there is a market failure. And as a regulator with an open mind, we said, well, let's get an independent panel that is going to look at the possibility of this market failure. I'm very delighted that we are where we are. We look at this with an open mind. The idea is to fix this for patients. So it doesn't matter who was to blame. This country is full of blames. It doesn't matter at this stage. I think that we are looking at this with an open mind, with the aim of fixing it. I think we should engage with the process, and perhaps this is the beginning of that engagement. Because in the end, we must find a solution that will promote access to healthcare in South Africa as the Constitution requires.
Health Minister Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi believes that this report is an important step in ensuring South Africans receive quality healthcare regardless of their social standing. Government is currently working towards implementing a nationwide medical insurance plan
to make sure that there is access to good quality healthcare services. And so he must be able to provide that in both the public and the private sector for all the citizens. And so he made it very clear of the role of the minister. It's my job to make sure that private healthcare, which is of good quality, and there is access to it by all citizens, is there in terms of the Constitution. And that's what I've been doing. The problem is many South Africans believe the only thing we need to do is to deal with the issues of quality in the public healthcare. Leave the private healthcare alone, is perfect, there's nothing wrong. And the judge has just disproven that it's not true. There's everything wrong here, it still needs to be regulated, and the minister must discharge his constitutional obligation.
From a constitutional standpoint, and the obligation that the Constitution imposes on the state to give effect to this, including, amongst other things, to make sure that when health services are provided by the private healthcare sector, the state remains obliged to regulate the manner in which those services are provided, including the affordability.
The final report and recommendations are expected to be published by the end of November and will be tabled in Parliament. But the provincial report will be open for public comment until the 7th of September.